Rich, today we're sitting down with Jan Freed. She's a leadership development and change management consultant with the Genesis Group. What was the biggest lesson you learned today?
I've got 3 pages of notes here. Among other things, one of the ways that she selects friends is, do they help you have healthy habits? I've never really thought of it quite like that.
Jan is an author of 2 books, Leading with Wisdom and Breadcrumb Legacy, also a podcaster of the show Becoming a Sage. In this episode, we talk about a lot of topics around change management, how change is an external factor. It's really more important about how we as entrepreneurs prepare our people for transition. Here's Jan Freed.
Hey, are you looking for a rewarding and profitable entrepreneurial opportunity? Consider owning a CertaPro painting franchise with a startup cost of $250,000 and an average franchise revenue of $1.8 million. CertaPro is a low-risk, high-reward investment. As a CertaPro franchise owner, you'll receive extensive training and ongoing support and have access to proven business models that have been successful for over 3 decades. Plus, you'll work with a team of highly dedicated professionals who are passionate about helping homeowners transform their spaces. Visit CertaPro.com/franchise to learn more about this exciting opportunity and start your journey towards financial success today. Hey, Jan, welcome to the Entrepreneurs United podcast. We're so happy to have you here today.
Well, I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
And as a fellow Iowan, I don't have many Iowans on the podcast. Happy to have one with us. Have you always been from Iowa, or were you born and raised here?
You know what? Yes, I have. I'm Iowa and Iowa educated. I actually grew up in northern Iowa, but I've lived in Des Moines, the capital, for 40 years.
Okay. And what's funny, when you say Iowa educated, in my travels and experience, a lot of people don't think of educated when they think of Iowa. However, we do have the highest graduation rates of all of the states.
Is that still true?
That is true.
I knew that it used to be true, but I wasn't so sure it was still true.
Google told me that at one point, highest graduation rates. I haven't looked it up in the last couple of years, though.
Okay.
And you doing leadership development, again, I'll call out, not many people think Iowa. When I think Iowa, I think leadership development. Like, I think that because that's what I do, right? And how did you get into this? Being Iowa born and raised, what led you to a path along leadership development that may be a little bit uncommon for an Iowan?
Okay. My first career was teaching at a small liberal arts college that I'm sure, Rich, you've heard of, Central College in Pella, Iowa, where they make,
Yep.
And I only taught that at that institution for 30 years. So after 30 years, I always lived in Des Moines, and that's an hour drive each way. And I just thought, I can't drive this anymore. And I wanted to do something else. I wanted to do it while I was young enough to do it. I left full-time teaching in 2011 and have been a full-time leadership development consultant, coach, speaker, train, wear a lot of hats since 2011. And it's been fun for me to practice what I'm preaching. So instead of teaching business and teaching leadership, which is what I taught, now I'm actually doing it. Now, I was always involved in the community, but that was another reason why I wanted to leave full-time teaching, because I wanted to get more involved in my community, but I was working outside of my community. Now I teach a graduate course for the University of Iowa, but just one course a year in leadership. So that's how I got into it.
How cool is that? And you're also into change management.
Yes, and talk about could the world be changing any faster? And I think really one of the, I want to say, advantages or silver linings of COVID, if you could call it that, is many companies and industries had to pivot very fast. They had to change very fast. And I think we learned a lot in that process. Maybe there is something to online learning. Maybe we don't always have to be physically present to be in a meeting. We can use Zoom. I think we learned a lot about, in fact, one thing I'm writing a lot about, I write a leadership column for Training Magazine, every issue and online also. And I've been writing a lot about how work has changed, how people do work has changed, and what people expect from work has changed. And that's been interesting.
Yeah, I bet. Everybody says people don't like change. And we generally find that's true. What are some of the keys to change management to lower the resistance? So, the basis of my question is, as an entrepreneur, we want to change our business. Our business model has to evolve. Our systems and our processes get more sophisticated. We're going to ask for changes from the people who we work with, whether they're employees or contractors or suppliers or customers. How do we lower that resistance bar to change that the average person we know has?
Okay, that's interesting. Because I've done a lot of work in this area and research also. My last book, I've had two books come out recently. One was Leading with Wisdom, Sage Advice from 100 Experts, where I actually interviewed more than 100 of some of the top thought leaders in the field of leadership. And my latest book that just came out in January is called Breadcrumb Legacy: How Great Leaders Live a Life Worth Remembering. And I'm mentioning these books because in both books, I talk about change and transition. And what I've learned is it's not so much that people resist change. Change tends to be an external, usually an external event that happens upon us. What people tend to resist is transition. And transition is the internal process. So most of the time, people are not prepared for what they're feeling about what has happened. And so I advocate and I coach leaders. You've got to help people with the transition. Now, one of the experts in this area was a man by the name of William Bridges, and his work is still referred to. He's now deceased, but I interviewed him a couple times when I was writing Leading with Wisdom. A more current book that builds on Bridges' work came out a year or two ago by Bruce Feiler, Feiler, called Life Transitions. And he refers to major transitions as life quakes. But I would recommend your listeners look at either Bridges' work or Feiler's. And again, they both emphasize that it's the transition part. It's how can we as leaders prepare people to accept the changes that are happening. And part of that involves understanding the transition process. And that could be a whole nother conversation. But a lot of people, they don't want to deal with transition. So they go from one job to the next, one marriage to the next. They're chasing something. And with transition, if we really need to, we need to sit with it and understand this is uncomfortable. I don't feel comfortable in this state, but this state is a natural part of the process. Anyway, I could talk more about that. But so I think leaders need to help, leaders need to understand what happens during transition in order to help others move through that.
I have a follow-up question on that with transition, but I want to get your take on something I learned and see if you as an expert, if you line up with it or not. I went to an Association of Talent Development local, it was a mini conference or workshop or something like that. And I went to a breakout room that was a 45-minute breakout room. And somebody who, I don't even remember who it was, it may have been you, said that they were a change management expert. And they handed a $20 bill to somebody in the audience. And they said, "You just experienced change. Are you upset?" And the person said, "No, I got $20. They said, "Okay, give me the $20 back." And the person gave it back. He said, "Now you just experienced another change. You just lost the $20 you thought you had. Are you upset now?" And they said, "That didn't feel good." And the person who was instructing the class said, "Exactly. That is one of the ways that we navigate change management with people is people aren't afraid of change. It's the fear of losing something. So one of the things to highlight with people when we're selling change as a positive thing is that there's gain involved in the change, and highlight that versus allowing people to feel a sense of loss about it. So as you're nodding your head, it appears that you agree with that, but I'd love for you to weigh in on that, on is that even a thing? Did this person who taught this? Did they make that up, or is that a principle of change management, or what is that? And do you agree with it?
That's a good story. First of all, it wasn't me.
Okay.
I actually have another exercise that I've used for a long time having to do with change that emphasizes what you just said, that many people associate change with loss, that they're going to lose something. There's a lot of fear involved. There's a lot of insecurity involved with change. And these are all natural feelings, okay? And what I would say is leaders need to help people understand that those are natural feelings. And then, like you said, but also provide the other side that it could be a gain. Really, in workshops and classes, I often say, when you hear change, how many of you think negative? And hands just shoot up. So I would
Yeah.
agree with you. But again, leaders need to, and then you prepare people with education, information, communication, all of those things, and actually participation. Can a lot of times with change, can you get people involved, empower them? Something needs to change here. We've got options. I need advice. What can we come up with as a group that would make the best change? I've written a couple books and many articles on continuous improvement in higher education. And continuous improvement is all about incremental change. And so we spend a lot of time helping people understand that all it means is we want to get better. How might we get better? And what are the ways we could get better? And so, anyway, yeah, this is a topic that interests me a lot. Yeah.
So, Jan, I'm not going to profess that this book is the end all be all of change management. The first
Okay.
book I ever read about change management in my 20s was Who Moved My Cheese? An absolute classic in my mind because it was
Yeah.
simple to read and it was like
Yeah.
a very simple book about change management. And I love what we're talking about here. And I want to just bring it back full circle because something you said connected with me in terms of my experiences, which is change in and of itself. And Rich, also the story you said, change in and of itself isn't necessarily bad, but we assume it's bad. And what with the assumption is not the change itself, it's the transition to what's next and the assumption that it may not be good for me. And you said, how can we help people better prepare for transition? What would be I guess, the high level view of that? What are the top three things a leader should do, or if there's five, to help their people prepare for a transition? Because a lot of times what we do as leaders, we show up in the office Monday morning, you're like, ta-da, everything's changed. And the employees are like, what is going on here? I can't believe this. It's shock and awe sometimes. So that'd be one thing that comes to mind is how can we better prepare them as well? Take your time, educate them, involve them in the process. Is there a simple strategy that you talk to leaders about?
I'm going to rely on Simon Sinek here.
Okay.
And I think the most important question to answer is why?
Uh-huh.
Why are we changing? Why is this being done? Why is this important to do? And then that ties into the communication, education, participation. Because I do think I think too many things happen and people are like, why are we doing this? So again, if people understand why, then they can communicate to others why we're doing this. And I say that the most important question leaders can ask is, how can I support you? So if they know why the change is taking place, then leaders can say, how can I support you through this change? And it might have to do with giving people more training, might have to do with resources. People might need more resources, but really helping people accept what's happening. They need to understand so that they can have some buy-in and know why they're doing what they're doing. And then leaders need to provide support, however that support might look.
Yeah. Yeah, certainly that buy-in I found to be absolutely critical when you involve people in the change and how we should process as a group and what's going on. Sometimes the changes, to your point, is an external factor. It's nothing we created on our own. It's just a change. COVID is an example. But sometimes it's self-inflicted. Leadership or the entrepreneur in an organization decides we're changing something, whatever that may be. It could be as simple as the logo of the company to the health benefit plan. But when
Yeah.
you do that change, the more people you involve in the process that have buy-in to what's going on and the why and what's happening, the less your transition effects will be in the organization. And so that's something I've learned over time that has been very key to me. So there's two books you wrote, right? Leading with Wisdom and Breadcrumb Legacy. I have a bunch of questions with both of them, so I'm going to try and narrow it down very simply.
Okay.
You interviewed over 100 influential leadership development people out there. What was the most impactful interview you had? And what was the message you walked away with going, wow?
I have to say, I interviewed William Bridges twice because I was so fascinated by what I learned the first time. And then
And what
I
was
said
that?
to him, I just want to talk with you again. And his work is, like I said, so still referred to. So when I say to people, well, I had a chance to interview him twice, that was the one that really made the biggest impact. I think the theme that emerged that really surprised me, because each chapter in Leading with Wisdom was a theme that emerged. And that was a theme on the chapter, I think is called Leaders. I don't know the exact title, but Leaders, I've got it here somewhere. Leaders lead with compassion and empathy. But within that chapter, and I built on that chapter in my breadcrumb book the chapter in that book is called Embracing Death. And I think the biggest aha, leader after leader, because my driving question was, how can I prepare leaders to be the kind of leaders needed in these uncertain times? That book came out in 2013. Leading with Wisdom came out in 2013, and that was after the financial crisis. Breadcrumb Legacy came out in January of 2020 after COVID. And what's interesting is leader after leader would say to me, you need to prepare leaders to deal with death, dying, and grief. And I'm like, what? I don't get this. Okay. Companies are dying, industries are dying, jobs are disappearing. Now, this was after, fast forward to COVID 2020. And not only are people dying, but again, death was front and center for everyone whether you're worried about your parents, whether you're worried about yourself, worldwide. And this whole chapter in Breadcrumb Legacy, now I call it Embracing Death. And the whole idea is embrace death, then you're freer to live. And all kinds of, you think that, like with legacy, usually people think of legacy at the end of life, but we don't know when the end of life is. So that's why breadcrumb, we're leaving our legacy all the time. Anyway, let you ask more questions.
Yeah, that's perfect. So that you helped explain what breadcrumb legacy is, which is I may get hit by a bus tomorrow. What are the breadcrumbs I'm leaving yesterday and today and the days before it? Because every day you should be leaving a little piece of yourself. And you talk about 5 actions for being proactive in your breadcrumb legacy. Can you give us a taste of what those actions are so I can make sure I leave some today?
Okay. Are you talking about my manifesto?
I'm not sure. I saw 5 actions for creating your own breadcrumb legacy. And
Oh,
that kind of piqued my interest to, okay, I want to learn more about that. And if I had to do 5 actions myself to leave my own breadcrumb legacy, what would those be?
okay. I want to kind of group those in terms of bigger concepts. I'll
Okay.
give you concepts that people need to think about.
Okay.
This whole idea of embracing death, that every interaction could be your last one. You never know. And so I think when you embrace your own mortality, you're a better person because you can help, especially as a leader, you can help others through death, dying, and grief. So that's one. Relationships is another key component that in the end, really all that matters in life is our relationships. I've done a lot of research on happiness, meaningfulness. If you're familiar with the Harvard longitudinal study where they studied Harvard men for 70 years, and if you had to boil down, the good life is about having healthy relationships. So that's another key component. And what happens is relationships don't always last forever. People die, people move, people retire. And so we have to kind of keep building, learning how to develop healthy relationships. And of course, that could be a whole nother podcast. Purpose. Why do you get up in the morning? I think it's really important for people to have a purpose. Now, purpose doesn't have to be with a big P. It could be a little p in terms of just something that you're looking forward to for the day. But when people tend to lose meaning and purpose, it's really easy to fall into numbing activities, drinking too much. Some people use drugs. Some people watch TV too much. I kind of advocate moderation in most things. So this whole idea of really finding something that you get excited about. And I think that's really key. And I think in life, there's a lot of learning and unlearning and relearning. And basically, I say you've got to keep going, you've got to keep growing. And it's important to get out of your comfort zone. One of the areas that I focus on is coaching people in the second half of life. But I ask people, when is the second half of life?
Hmm.
People will say, oh, 50, 55, 60. And I said, well, that's okay if you're going to live 120. The average life expectancy is 80. And so 40. The second half of life is earlier than you think. So those are some keys that I would keep in mind.
Why'd you select coaching people in the second half of life?
I just got introduced to this early on from a book called From Aging to Saging. And my professional mentor, who was like, oh, he was probably 40 years older than me. Anyway, he said, Jan, baby boomers, they're not going to know what to do with themselves. If they retire at 55 or 60 or 65, they're still going to have 20 years to live. What are they going to do? They're used to high achieving. He said, you can help them. And so that's become kind of a focus. Now, what I've done is I weave it into leadership work. So I weave this into how are you leading your own life? Because the most important person to lead is yourself. So, how are you leading your own life? And would you follow yourself? And then what are got some workshops that I call Beyond the Money, which are non-financial pre-retirement workshops. Because so many companies offer retirement planning as financial planning. You have to have enough money to support your lifestyle. But once you have enough money, then it's everything else people are thinking about. And that's what I cover in my Beyond the Money. Where are you going to find meaning and purpose when you're no longer in your job? Where are you going to find relationships that you really like when you no longer have coworkers? So that's where I'm going with that.
That's excellent. You said from the Harvard longitudinal study that matched up with all that matters in life is relationships. So, gosh, I would be remiss if I didn't go, wow, if that's all that matters, we should take a pause there and understand more about it. How does one develop healthy relationships?
That's a great question. And I actually am doing a lot of work in that area. One of the things that's interesting is we live in a time when we say we're connected 24/7 and people can measure their relationships, how many friends, how many connections, how many followers, and the list goes on. All kinds of research would say most of those relationships are very shallow. In fact, I really beefed up a lot of my relationships because in order to get a publisher, they want to know those quantitative numbers. And I was proud of not being on. If I want to get a publisher, then I have a lot of friends I don't even know who they are. Okay, which is kind of goofy, but I did find a publisher, Rutledge, and they're out of England and New York. So I think it's important that we often let me start with this. Most of our friendships tend to be what we call front end. We meet people in we grew up with them. Then we go to college. We have friends in college, roommates. We're on teams, we're in groups. Then we get out of college and then we're in careers and we have colleagues and we're on teams and life goes on. And we often meet a lot of our friends through our kids if we have kids. So athletic teams, and I was a soccer mom for a long time. And so you have soccer friends. And so you're meeting a lot of your friends through your kids. So I say front end loaded. So what happens is your empty nest, you could be empty desk, you could even be empty zest for life, because a lot of these relationships, when your kids are gone, college friendships, unless you're very good at maintaining those, we all get busy raising kids. We're so busy, we don't have time. If you don't invest time, then relationships are not reciprocated. And then it's easy to lose track of people. And now my husband's best friend just died at age 60 of lymphoma. And we think that's way too young. And so things are happening and people die, retire, move away. And so your circle of friends shrinks. Research says that if we have 5 people that we could call in the middle of the night with an emergency, we're lucky. There's a chapter in Breadcrumb Legacy where I call Who'll Help You Move the Couch? And that there's a whole story that goes with that. But the whole chapter is about relationships and how do we build relationships. And one of the best things that, first of all, I think you have to, there was a clip on Jane Fonda, because I don't know if you've heard, but Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin, Sally Field, and Rita Moreno, I think. 80 for Brady. I don't know if you've heard of that movie. It's a new movie out, 80 for Brady. And these 4 women, it's based on a true story. These 4 women have this mad crush on Tom Brady. And he does make an appearance in this movie. I haven't seen it yet, but I've seen a lot of trailers. But Jane Fonda said something like, I don't think I would have lived this long without my female friends. And the question was, how do you maintain those friendships? She said, I pursue them. If there's somebody I want to get to know, I get to know them and then I really cultivate that relationship. And I'm very similar. I send out 250 Christmas cards to people that I haven't seen for decades, but I want to stay in touch with. I make them so they're kind of a gift. I read something else with it I thought was clever. It said, be like a golden retriever. So try to get to know people. And the best way to do that is to ask questions, not too personal, but they don't have to be shallow. How are you? Try to ask open-ended questions that are very sincere. Like I really enjoyed what you said. Tell me where you read that or learned that. But I also read where be like a golden retriever. If you're not giving them attention, they'll find somebody else. Just move on and don't take it personally. I think we have to keep trying because some relationships, because of death and dying and moving away, some relationships don't last forever. And if they're not, and I like to use the word healthy because one of the things that's really important for people to remember is who we hang around at any age. When we're parents, we worry about peer pressure and who are our teenagers hanging out with. It's just as important as we get older, who we hang out with. Are you hanging out with positive people who love life, who have a mission and purpose, who are interesting? Because you're going to adopt similar habits. Like I have a role model and I just think she's a good friend of mine. She's very beautiful. She dresses very fashionably. We have similar tastes, but not totally the same. And she's 2 or 3 years older than me. But I look at her and she keeps me caring about what I look like in a very positive way. Okay, I need to continue to work out and I'm not obsessed with it, but I think it's important to look for role models. Who's living a life that looks attractive to you? And what is it about that? So I say be like a golden retriever. Try to make friends. If it didn't work, you just go on to the next person.
And I got a couple of things from you on healthy relationships. One of them was time is definitely a component, and cultivate the relationship through asking questions and spending time. How would one be able to identify if they have a healthy relationship with someone or not? And whether it be in a marriage relationship or with kids or with a neighbor or a friend or somebody back from soccer mom days, is there a question? Is there a litmus test when I'm like, okay, is this a healthy relationship? And where do I go from here if it's not?
Yeah. When I use the word healthy, what it means for me is when I'm around these people, am I thinking in a positive way? I don't want to be around people that are gossiping, that are talking others down. If I am, then they're probably talking me down when I'm not there. So for me, it's like positive people. Are these people that when I'm around them, does it encourage me to have healthy habits? One time I said to my husband, I said, I really want to limit my time around this couple because I think they drink too much. And that doesn't feel right to me. It doesn't bring out good. I want to limit our time because I don't think it's healthy. And so that's what I mean when I say healthy relationship. So to me, really good relationship has to do with it's for the most part positive. You can be vulnerable because you trust them, so you're willing to confide. I think trust has a lot to do with it. Can you trust this person? And even trust them when they say that they're going to do something. Will they follow through and do it? So that's what I mean when I say healthy.
Joanne, certainly as you're bringing through all these points of relationship, we're talking about interpersonal relationship outside of the workplace. But something you mentioned earlier may play a factor into the relationship that employees have with their work or that entrepreneurs may have with their employees. When you said you were working maybe on an article for the magazine about what people expect from work, I'm assuming relationships plays into that as well in terms of the relationship they don't only have with the actual workplace, but the people in the workplace, the entrepreneur, everything else. How do you tie those outside of work and inside of work relationships, or maybe what do people expect from work today, in your opinion?
That is a really multifaceted question because I define a leader as it's not a title and it's not a position, it's a relationship. And so if you're in a position to influence the lives of others, you're a leader. So that includes pastors, teachers, coaches, parents. If you're in the position to influence the lives of others, you're a leader. And if you look at leadership as a relationship, then I say a lot of time that leaders need to spend time thinking about how to build healthy relationships. I find it very interesting. When times are tough, leaders tend, and I'm generalizing, but I've seen this happen too often, that leaders become like turtles and they just crawl inside their shell and they want to hide. They don't want to have those conversations. They'd rather hide in their office. And I coach people, that's when you need to be out. People want to see you, they want visibility. When I was writing Leading with Wisdom, one chapter was called Vulnerability as a Strength. And my editor said, "Oh, you don't want, is this book just for women?" And I said, "No, men don't resonate. That men will not read this about vulnerability." I have to tell you, I was a little ahead of my time because then Brene Brown came out and she's talking about vulnerability and shame and making a fortune. So I was ahead of my time. But when you're willing to be vulnerable with people, then people are willing to trust you more as a leader. So this isn't true confessions. You don't need to go to your people and say, "Oh, I didn't know that. I don't know that. I made that mistake." But I think it's okay to say to people, and I'm not the only one that believes this, but research would say it's okay to say, "I don't know the answer to that. I'll get back to you. Let me do some research." Or, "I wish I knew the answer to that." Or, "That's a great question. We're all in this together." I think what happens is a lot of times people feel that the leader is immune from what's happening to everybody else. And I think if the leader says, "This is really hard on me, this affects me too," or "This is affecting my life."
Rich, I don't know if you feel this, but when I think about your book, Leading with Wisdom, when I think about Breadcrumb Legacy, when I think about your podcast, Becoming a Sage, Conscious Aging and Living, and really the tagline on your LinkedIn page is Living Your Best Life. The major theme that keeps coming over and over again is how healthy are your relationships? Because you are the product of the top 5 to 10 people you hang around with. It really seems like that is a major theme to happiness in your second life, I guess, to your point. Also, in any life, first part or second part doesn't really make a difference. It seems, Rich, that theme keeps resonating. Do you agree?
Absolutely. Especially when, Jan, you make that comment, as I said a moment ago, all that matters in life is relationships. When it's all said and done, that is what literally you go to the grave with. That is your legacy, is what you've left behind in the relationships which still do live.
Yeah, the study I was talking about, I'm pretty sure that the author's name is Robert Waldinger. And he did a great TED Talk. And I think the TED Talk is called The Good Life. And he just had a book come out that I just bought. I haven't had a chance to read it yet. And I might mention that I've done a couple TED Talks, TEDx, and one was on embracing death, seeing life through a different lens. And I'd encourage your listeners to check that out. And then another was a virtual TEDx, and it's called Becoming a Nobody. And both of those are basically chapters in the Breadcrumb Legacy. But it really is all about relationships. I wrote this really long white paper and read all this research on happiness and meaning. They are different because I'm actually not that wild about the word happy, because happiness is fleeting. Life isn't all happy. But Waldinger would say the good life is about meaning and fulfillment and realizing that life has highs and lows. And so this whole idea of embracing death also helps us understand resiliency. And when I was talking to the sages, because I want to prepare people, I said, "Well, how do you learn compassion and empathy?" And they said, "Become a hospice volunteer." So I've gone through hospice training twice because it was 4 years apart. And I didn't have time to volunteer until I left my full-time job in 2011. So now I'm a hospice volunteer and I go into patients' homes to give caregivers a break. But if you ever want to feel gratitude, I've learned a lot. How can you create healthy relationships? How can you develop as a person so that, you are compassionate and you empathize? And all of those skills are becoming even more important after COVID.
Jan,
we call them the soft skills, but the soft skills are really the hard skills.
Isn't that true? As we look to wrap up for today, I would love to hear from you. If you could make a demand or a command for all entrepreneurs that they would follow, and you've got one thing that you could say, if I could wave a magic wand and all entrepreneurs would start doing X in the next 24 hours, the world would be a better place, what would X be for you?
That's an excellent question. And I have to say, Rich, I've never thought about it. But here's my response. I do have a chapter in Breadcrumb Legacy, Become a Nobody. And I mentioned I had a TEDx talk. That chapter is really about ego. And it's really about controlling the ego and not letting the ego control you. So I would say to entrepreneurs, understand what the ego does, understand how the ego manifests in dark ways. When you understand how it can manifest in dark ways, then you can control it. And when you control your ego, then surround yourself with people who complement your weaknesses so that you build a team that really is strong. And I want to throw this in because it's March Madness. I don't know when you're going to post this, but because it's March Madness, I want to throw this in. Any good coach looks around and says, I need a point guard, I need a center, I need a team that complements one another. And we all know, if you like basketball, and I do love basketball, that when it comes to March Madness, it isn't always the greatest individuals that win. It's the individuals who can work together as a team because they complement each other. One of the things, and I want to throw this in because, Rich, we're Iowans, but Caitlin Clark, who I think, wasn't she voted most valuable player in the nation, I think? And she's from, anyway, one of the things that I find fascinating about her, and this shows you my age a little bit, but I was a big Larry Bird fan, okay? And she reminds me of Larry Bird because she can shoot, but Larry was known for his assists. Again, you play as a team, not just as individual players. And so I would say to entrepreneurs, put your ego aside, make sure that it's in check, don't let it get out of balance, and then know your weaknesses and hire for those so that you can play to your strengths and build this leadership team where you enjoy being together and you can take your company to the next level.
That is excellent. Thank you so much for joining us today. If people wanted to get more of you, how would you like them to go about it?
That's great. I have a website. It's just janfried.com, 2 N's and 2 E's. And on my website, they could subscribe. They could get a monthly newsletter. I have a monthly podcast, as you mentioned, called Becoming a Sage, where I interview thought leaders about wisdom, work and life. And then I'm very active on LinkedIn. I post quite a bit on LinkedIn. I'm getting more active on Instagram. Those would be the main ways.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing so much of your wisdom.
Thank you for the invitation, and I'm very grateful.
Please stick around for a few more minutes while Rich and I break down this episode.
John, I gotta say, one of the things sticking with me is one of the last things she said regarding Larry Bird. And it was to be known for your assists. I think there are an awful lot of entrepreneurs that want to be known as the scoring champion. And this was part of the conversation with Scott Drake that we had many podcasts ago. And where Scott talked about someone who's really good. He was somebody who was really good in IT. And because he was so good in IT, he got to supervise IT people. And then he got promoted as a supervisor. And then all of a sudden, like, he doesn't know how to be a leader. He knows how to be a really good IT person. He knows how to be the scorer versus being the person who can help the scorer do what they do best. I feel like it's been a bit of a transition in my professional career to be a little bit more behind the scenes myself and be known for the assists mostly by the people who are doing the scoring and not quite as out front. So that's one of the reasons why that's really sticking with me and I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I frame everything you just talked about as servant leadership. It's reversing the org chart upside down. Are the people in your organization working for you, the entrepreneur, or are you working for the people in the organization? And when you do reverse it, it is somewhat freeing. I learned that maybe about a decade ago, this concept of servant leadership. And wow, it doesn't have to be all on me. I don't have to have all the answers. I don't have to go put the ball in the net, right? Or the hoop. I can assist somebody in executing that transaction or executing what they need to do. and feel the fulfillment behind that person, and also get the appreciation and the relationship with that person we were helping them through their journey. So I look at that as servant leadership, Rich. I think it's one of the most freeing things you can do as a leader is not try and be end all to everything. And that really goes back to that ego comment, right? That we just talked about at the end. Become a nobody. You don't have to be front and center to everything to achieve success as an entrepreneur and or a leader. And the best leaders in the world are those that are operating behind maybe the people you could pick any industry, politics, whether it be CEOs of large companies. They all have coaches of people that are helping them achieve their goals and their successes. So really love that. And we talked a little bit about a topic on this conversation that we didn't really dive a little bit into, but it's somewhat interesting, right? This concept of non-financial pre-retirement planning. Let's stick with sports. Let's think about basketball players, football players, hockey players, soccer players, you name the sport player. One of the biggest things that those leagues, professional leagues are doing now in the United States, I'm sure they do it overseas as well, is they literally are hiring people for post-play development of careers because these athletes are retiring at 30 years old, made millions and millions of dollars, and don't know what to do with themselves. Yet we don't really do that as entrepreneurs. We just figure we're just going to continue to be an entrepreneur forever. We don't really plan through our post life and what we want to do in that post career life. So it's maybe something that we just need to take a little bit more of, because when you do lose that identity, it's pretty tough.
Jan talked about, I believe what you're referencing with her was, it was the Beyond the Money. I don't know if she called it a seminar or workshop, but she called it Beyond the Money. And I'm really proud to say it was about 10 years ago that I participated in bringing vision planning to CertaPro, where we did have the owners really think about what is your ultimate personal life, and then what is your ultimate professional life. You cannot use CertaPro language. So if there's somebody who's a listener, or even if you wanted to, John, if you were doing your ultimate professional life, you can't use the language of your current business. You have to talk about your professional life independent of your current business. Then that third piece is, okay, where does your current business fit in? Because all of us are going to leave the current opportunity where we are working. At some point, we're going to leave. We're either going to get fired, we're going to quit, we're going to retire, or we're going to die. We're going to leave. What we're doing is a stepping stone to something. And if we die, it's a stepping stone to the breadcrumb legacy, to Jan's point. So that is an exercise that we do focus on with our entrepreneurs. And what we find is it does deeply connect them with meaning and purpose, which is one of the things that Jan had talked about that was so important, was people getting connected with their purpose so that they would be able to go execute better. Why do you get up in the morning? Was one of the things that she...
When you think about the breadcrumb legacy, purpose is one of the 4 or 5 things she mentioned, beyond obviously relationships is a big piece we talked about today, but having that purpose, I think, can also play into those, right? If your purpose for your life and you know exactly what you want to achieve in your life, chances are there's going to be relationships built into that. And there's going to be knowledge of things, whether it be touristic knowledge of things or whatever, which is another component she talked about, always keep learning. The one that I struggled with maybe a little bit, and I think it's the same thing with Becoming Nobody, which was her TEDx talk, the concept of embracing death. And it's just interesting because it's meant as a little bit of a shocker, but there is change. Sometimes people look at whether it be the death of a marriage or the death of a business or the death of a certain career or an industry or just the end of something, maybe to put it differently. There's going to be ends to things. There's a book by Henry Cloud, Necessary Endings, which I think is a very, very powerful book of, look, things are going to come to an end. How are you preparing yourself for that transition of that change? A very tough conversation for people to digest and think about and prepare for, but to embrace it is very difficult. No one really wants to embrace massive change. So I don't know how you took that.
Yeah, I agree. I didn't want to go there with the recent death of my mother and what does that mean with embracing death. I think that may have a little different spin than where she was going, where embracing death in a professional way. And I know she said with COVID that we're embracing death like literally, but it was more around the end of, to your point, a business or a career or an opportunity or a vision, and that's okay and things change. You touched back to her word on it's not about change that people are resistant to, it's about transition. And one of the things she said was highlighting the why with people. By the way, I loved her educate, communicate, and participate. That participate in the solution, I think, is so key. And you highlighted that in the podcast there. But the highlight the why, what I wrote down, she didn't say it, but it was my interpretation of it. The highlighting of the why there is going to be a change. I think as entrepreneurs, what we really need to highlight is the existing pain point, which is going to be relieved by the change. And the bigger that pain point is, the more open to change I think people become. I think that is really one of the keys to highlighting the why. So often we go into, hey, here's where we're going to change. Let me talk about all the positives of the why we're going to change, versus going, here's current state. Let me point out to you all the downsides of the current state. Let me point out to you, if we don't change, here are the downsides that are going to happen that haven't happened yet. I think that's one of the ways that we can highlight the why, and people will become more comfortable with the impending change.
Yeah, I as well loved educate, communicate, participate, but that's also part of being a leader if you want to lead with compassion and empathy, which is one of the biggest learnings that Jen got from William Bridges. Do you know who William Bridges is, by the way? Because some of our
No.
audience may not. I did look it up during the conversation, and he's an American author, speaker, consultant of organizational change, best known for his book Transitions, Making Sense of Life's Changes and making the most of change and job shift, how to prosper in a workplace without a job. So just a couple of big pieces of work there in the idea of transition and change. So just wanted to highlight that because I wasn't sure exactly who that was, but obviously somebody that's very big in that space. When he talks about leaders leading with compassion and empathy, that plays into educate, communicate, participate. It plays into your ability to influence others if you are compassionate, have empathy, and you're able to build those relationships with them and be vulnerable, which builds up your trust. And you have that personal development going in there. So all of it continues to play back in this conversation to me about how you as a leader and also as a person are developing very deep and meaningful relationships with those you interact with on a daily basis.